Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Stephen Rosenbaum. I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of the Sustainable Media Center. And Sustainable Media Center is really built for conversations just like this, to ask big questions, put together extraordinary groups of people, and really look toward a future where sustainable media is a reality rather than what it currently is, which is dangerous to young people. We have three extraordinary conversation conveners with us today. Emma Lemke is the co-founder of Design It For Us. She is both an early person who has been facing the challenges of social media and now an extraordinary activist. We have Matthew Bergman, who is the founder of the Social Media Victims Law Center. And we have Brian Stelter, who is both a parent and a journalist and has a book coming out that is very much tied to this. Here's how we're going to structure the next hour. We're going to ask each of our conveners to give a brief introduction of where they think the state of this issue is. And then we're going to dig into a conversation. If you have questions, I would say throw them in the chat for now. And then as we get further into the conversation, we'll open it up to kind of a free-flowing discussion. I would only say this about this group. This is a group of educated, passionate, committed people on this issue with different points of view, no doubt. But we don't need to do the 101 level stuff. Let's assume everyone comes here with a basic understanding of the issue. And with that, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking time on a busy Monday morning. And Matt, let's start with you. What is this? You read the lawsuit, and as I believe deeply, novices make the mistake of reading legal documents and thinking that they understand what they mean. So I read the lawsuit, and I assume that lots of our attendees today did. But let's presume that a lawyer sees different meaning in the words. First of all, is it a good lawsuit? Is it well drafted? Is it interesting?
Well, yeah, the lawsuit is the quintessential exercise of the police power of attorneys general to look after the citizens of their state. And it is the culmination of a 2-year process that began with Frances Haugen's breathtaking revelations before Congress regarding what the social media industry knows regarding the hazards that its products are posing to kids. By way of background, I'm a product liability lawyer. And when I got involved in this case, I saw everything that I had seen in the asbestos litigation that I had been involved in for 20 years. You had in asbestos a public health crisis. You had a cause and effect relationship between a hazardous substance and disease, and you had outrageous corporate misconduct. You have everything here on steroids. First of all, you have a public health crisis involving the mental health harms that the Surgeon General has documented is plaguing children, not only in the United States, but throughout the world, manifesting itself most tragically in the 146% increase in suicidality in 12 to 16-year-olds, as well as extensive eating disorders, anxiety, depression, self-harm, and just general social misfunction. You also have an emerging body of literature manifested most explicitly by the Surgeon General, showing a direct cause and effect relationship between the profusion of social media and the advent of this mental health crisis. Let's be clear. The crisis did not begin until 2012, well after the internet had become ubiquitous in the life of young people. It was not the development of the internet, which has plenty of bad things about it, but it also it was the ability to have front-facing phones that really manifested this issue. And finally, it was the revelations of Frances Haugen regarding an unbelievable level of corporate malfeasance. This is, as a cynical old asbestos lawyer, you look at the documents that Frances bravely revealed, and they make the asbestos companies look like choir boys. They call teens herd animals. They call opening multiple accounts value adds. They know what their products are doing, and they make an explicit decision to keep doing it. Now, what's different about this? Why do you have this phenomenon? Because the other thing that you see from Frances's documents is that there are a lot of people of conscience in these companies who are trying to put a brake on this corporate malfeasance. The difference is that the social media industry is the only industry in the world that does not face the prospect of civil liability. Every other company, whether they are good, bad, or indifferent, whether they're greedy or magnanimous, always has to worry about the prospect of civil liability. An auto manufacturer who decides whether to cut costs by $50 million by putting bad brakes on their car knows that they will incur civil liability exceeding that if they get away with that. And up until now, companies have shielded themselves improperly behind Section 230 to avoid the same level of reasonable care that every other company in America has. So we embarked 2 years ago, the Social Media Victims Law Center, in filing the first product liability case involving social media and kids. We used the incredible work that Francis has done, as well as the work by John Haidt, Jean Twenge, and more recently, the incredible path-breaking neurologic research by Eva Telzer. And we were able to file the first cases focusing on the concept of product liability, that it's not the content. It is the design of the product that is designed to addict kids, to show them not what they want to see, but what they can't look away from, and to show them progressively more and more and more extreme material to maintain the dopaminic response cycle to keep them addicted to the products. This is the focus of these cases.
So, Emma, I have to ask you next. So I read news night and day. And when last Tuesday, the state attorney generals filed this case, my immediate reaction was I living in some kind of a hole? Like, did you see this coming? Did you have a sense that there was this train coming down the tracks? I mean, it really, in some ways, your testimony, what was it? It was a little more than a year ago. I mean, I got to believe you left the room and thought, I hope something happens because of this. Not to put a smiley face on what is still a terrible problem, but does this feel like a good step for you?
Absolutely. And hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here, and I'm really thankful to be a part of this conversation. As you can see, there's going to be a little bit of movement. I'm currently a junior at Washington University in St. Louis. So like any other college student running around, I tried to find the quietest space, but I apologize if there's noise in the background. To your question, my work has been ongoing for a while. I say that even though I began advocacy starting about 3 years ago with my work starting the Log Off movement, this has been something I've dealt with my entire life, having the internet and social media be an extension of myself and my social life, engaging on platforms like Instagram since the age of 12. And since the age of 12, I did also feel the negative consequences of an unregulated environment where big tech was able to use my increased rates of anxiety, depression, its impact on my body image, eating, really manifesting statistics that have been circulating in these cases, and that have been released through Facebook whistleblowers and beyond. So to me, when I entered the space, it was incredibly important for me to see any action, any steps to protect the next generation. Anything was meaningful to me because it meant that one more 12-year-old girl did not have to go through what I dealt with. One more young person could experience growing up without the fear of having to be sucked back in continuously and having their humanity stripped via a company that was preying upon their dopaminic responses and their own neuropsychology. And their neuro pathways. So to me, when I saw the lawsuit and I was reading through it, I was incredibly excited. And after I gave my testimony, I expected some movement. That being said, I think going back and, reading a lot of the articles that are continuously put out by Frances Haugen, Facebook whistleblower, she has said more needs to be done. The fact that I have released these documents and continuous research comes out and we are only beginning to take smaller and smaller steps is still upsetting. So I think that there is kind of this excitement surrounding the possibility of movement and of action on any front, especially as someone who wants to be a lawyer. I'm incredibly excited that there is movement. That being said, I think what I said in my testimony was so little is being done too late. You have already allowed a generation to be harmed. You have already allowed companies to run in this environment that is the wild, wild west. We have become a generation of guinea pigs. Action needs to occur as quickly as possible to protect the next generation. Any lawsuit, any form of, mobilization of actors to combat this is important and is necessary. And it should be applauded. But in my opinion, it is this continuous fight and feeling that so little has been done. But again, incredibly optimistic. And as someone who wants to pursue a career in the legal field and who is an advocate, I think a lot of the young people around me are just, I think we've been given a little more fuel in our fight when we saw this come up. And I think that will continuously allow us to keep mobilizing, engaging, both in political pathways and beyond.
So Brian, you got three different roles on this in this conversation: journalist, investigator, author with a new book coming out, which we'll talk about, and also father. And you talk in your social media about your two children, Sonny and Story, and we see their boots behind you. Tell us a little bit about this case and how you felt. And I have a follow-up question about I have a thought about something that maybe made you angry, but we'll get there in a minute. So tell us about the case and how you reacted to it.
Sure. Number one, I think I'm mostly just here because I'm cheering for Emma, and I'm cheering for people like Emma and groups like hers. That's how I view as my main role. I look around, having spent the last 20 years covering media and tech, feeling like I was theoretically, right in the thick of it, right in the middle of it. I should have been able to see what was happening sooner. And now all of us in 2023 look back and we realize what the hell just happened, and how devastating it's been. Zuckerberg said it. He said he was going to move fast and break things, and he did, and he broke a lot of us. He broke a lot of us, by the way, of many different ages. Although I think for this conversation, we're right to focus on young people, and that's where the focus needs to be going forward. But he broke, that these technologies broke a lot of people, and it feels to me like the wake up that's happening. There's another front page story in the New York Times about this a few days ago. This wake up is long overdue and very, very, very welcome. So I mostly approach this as someone who wonders. We have a current generation that's advocating for themselves, that's able to see what's happening, and then you've got a 4-year-old like my son and a 6-year-old like my daughter who are gonna be in this in just a few years. And I find myself thinking on the local level, what can I do to try to shape the environment to make it safer for them? Not to hold them back and not to make technology seem evil to them or dangerous necessarily, but to make sure that they're not suffering these adverse consequences. So that's the way I'm looking at it. I am struck by my 6-year-old always asking for a phone already, and I assume that's what it was like when my mother was smoking when I was 6 years old. At least with cigarette smoke, you could tell that it stunk. Like you could tell that it wasn't appealing, right? You could see the downside in the air. With the cell phone, there's no way to show her those negatives. So that's the main way that's the main attitude that I'm coming to this from.
So I was on an airplane coming back from a business trip 2 weeks ago, and sitting next to me was a mother, and next to her was a car seat with a child in it, toddler age, I would guess about 2. They sat down, she handed, and there's no judgment to the parents whatsoever. We'll talk about that in a minute. She handed him a phone. We put on headphones. The plane took off. And the plane, when planes take off, you feel it in your body. You feel the pressure. And I remember as a child being very excited by planes taking off. He didn't notice, didn't look up. For an hour and a half on the flight, he looked at the phone. Literally, as we were landing, she took the phone away, and he freaked out until she gave him the phone back. And I know, Matthew, one of the things that you're focused on is, and I was at an event that a number of parents that are involved in your organization spoke at, and there's a real focus on not blaming parents, on not holding parents responsible for the impact that technology is having on children. This was the Meghan and Harry Archwell Foundation event in New York. And I have to say, I came to that event without much of an understanding of what was going to be presented. They kept the rundown of it kind of private. And when the parents ended up on stage in 2 different sessions, the stories were so heartbreaking. I mean, these were clearly families struggling to work with their kids, try and understand the internet. They all had passwords. They'd all worked with it. and these were the parents of children that committed suicide. Um, I just, as an attorney, unlike the asbestos cases, isn't there just haven't you kind of put yourself on a personal emotional roller coaster to work with these families?
Well, yeah, you can't do this work and not feel it. I mean, I to be honest with you, I always regretted that I was too young to have gone down to Mississippi in 1962 and been a civil rights lawyer. And this has the same moral clarity to me as the civil rights movement did in the 50s and 60s. Just as there's no way you can conceivably justify forcing Black people to drink out of separate drinking fountains, how in the world can it be okay for a company to send suicidal videos to a 16-year-old boy telling him to jump in front of a train, and he jumps in front of a train? This is, I think, the most important cause, legal cause that we face as a society, and the outcome will really determine which way we go. And the mayhem that these products are inflicting on our kids, most of which is preventable, needs to come to an end, or we're going to have a second generation destroyed.
So Brian, I rewatched last night an interview you did with Nick Clegg, which you called a pre-butt, which is the phrase I had not heard before, in which he was getting on your show to talk about the testimony that Frances Haugen was about to give. And that it was before, I believe, the Wall Street Journal article. And I found myself watching it, knowing what we know now. Reporters get lied to all the time. I mean, that's the nature of the job. But, sitting here today, knowing that there was a big, long segment. It was 8, 9, 12, 15, is there not a certain amount, if you were sitting across from him today, how does he keep that job, knowing what we were already learned from the Wall Street Journal last week, from Arturo Bajar, and what we're going to learn tomorrow in the testimony, knowing that that they had already been put on notice, that it wasn't just Frances, who they presented as kind of an outlier. She didn't really know what she was talking about. The documents were inaccurate. That whole defense just imploded with maybe our audience doesn't know about the Arturo Bajar testimony that's coming up. Does anyone want to kind of just bring us up to speed on that, other than what we read in the paper? Essentially, this is a Facebook employee who had a 14-year-old daughter who got so upset and was in the trust and safety area running it that he wrote Mark and Sheryl Sandberg just before the Frances Haugen material came out, and put in writing in an email to them, this is what's happening to our children. So their whole defense that they didn't know or they weren't alerted is just implodes on that. And, Emma, maybe it's worth you telling the story. The testimony he's going to give tomorrow will have the same kind of experience that you had. What's it like to know that you're going to sit on that table and speak to Congress and hopefully, wake them up? What was that like for you as a young woman?
I think it's incredibly daunting, but also I think it for me was an honor to understand that there was space given for a young person to not only represent, themselves and their story, but the story of so many other young people who had been harmed, who had been continuously preyed upon, who had been continuously, deprioritized. And that in and of itself is unbelievably moving and just inspiring. For me, when I sat there, I really felt as though it was the most important conversation that I was going to have potentially in my life. And I still believe that. And I think that's what will be felt tomorrow. I think even for individuals watching and listening, I can anticipate that it will, the air in the room will be sucked out. Everyone's going to be waiting to really hear his tale and to hear kind of his experience. I believe that this is an incredibly important platform to be given. I really do believe that tomorrow will hopefully be another jump lawfully for action, if not on the part of the legislative or part of the companies themselves. I do think that activists will use this as continuous fuel to keep the fight going. So I know that from my perspective, that was my experience, and I really do believe that this will be another catalyst for greater youth action, mobilization, and at least hopefully public awareness of the issue, and at least the magnitude of how deep and horrific this really can get.
Let me interject a cautionary note, is that if moral outrage were enough to change these products and these companies, it would have happened probably even before Frances Haugen. The only thing that is going to change their behavior is to change their economic exigencies. Until it is cheaper for them to design and produce safe social media products, they will continue to be willing to take the public hit and continue to profit. And so it is vitally important to use the civil justice system and the congressional legislative process to hold them economically accountable for the carnage that their products are inflicting on so many families across America and indeed across the world.
Talk for a minute about let's talk about your process. So I go to your website, I have a young teenager, I'm concerned, I fill out like how many families do you represent? How many cases do you have filed? Just the scale.
Yeah, we currently represent about 2,300 families whose children have been injured or killed from social media. They involve kids who have died of suicide. They involve kids that have died from fentanyl poisoning, from drugs that they purchased through Snapchat, or through accidental injuries like TikTok challenges, as well as children who have are suffering and in some cases passed away from eating disorders. We are very careful. Not everybody who, if the standard for a lawsuit was anyone who had a adverse emotional impact from social media, that would be everyone 30 and younger. We look to cases where a child has either seen a therapist or a medical professional in regard to the harms resulting from social media. We have about 200 cases filed. We go through a careful vetting process and are filing cases at a steady clip, and expect to have well over 2,000 cases filed by early next year. And those cases are pending in a federal MDL in California State Court, as well as individual cases in individual state courts around the country. And it is, and what I will say as a plaintiff's lawyer is, in 30 years, I've never had clients less concerned about money and more concerned about accountability. I mean, these parents who have lost a child, there's nothing that will ever bring back the loss and the pain that they feel every day. And to the letter, they say one thing. Every one of them says, if through these efforts, one family is spared what we're going through, if one set of parents does not have to experience the pain, then all of this has been worth it. So I feel extremely humbled and proud to be representing these families. And the only thing the only surety is it's going to be a long, hard fight. But I've never felt more proud and honored to be doing the legal work that I'm doing.
Emma, talk a little bit about Design It For Us. The website's amazing. There's enormous amounts of information there. You guys have worked really hard. But for people that get to a page of kind of detailed changes and don't understand the mission, how does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wish I had my co-chair with me, Zaman, who's phenomenal in every sense of the word. But Design It For Us is just basically a coalition, a youth-led coalition of individuals who are seeking to drive key policy points and change related to kids, teens, and young adults online, wanting to prioritize their safety, their well-being, and their agency as tech companies design their products. So we've come out with policy platforms. We have large coalition calls with young people around the globe, and it's our way of really having young people, get a seat at the legislative table, having young people help shape and mold policy in a way that prioritizes what we need and what we want, and it informs lawmakers and in their decisions. So we work really, we work very hard to do that in many different ways. Zaman right now, for instance, is working very hard on drafting and continuously drafting out policy platforms, helping, inform decisions as they're made. I'm working right now to help mobilize our coalition largely and to spread news about the lawsuits, to get young people to share more information and to want to dig a little deeper into how their states are engaging. But fundamentally at the core of what we're doing is wanting to have young people be given a voice in the conversation where they are the experts, where they are the ones who can really speak to the issues, inform, change, and help drive real policy that we believe will protect the next generation. And it's only growing by the day, adding new members. So we're incredibly excited to see where the coalition goes and how we can help really play a pivotal role in creating safer online spaces for the next generation.
So the reason why having all of us together is so important is there is no silver bullet solution to this. The lawsuits are part of it. Public awareness is part of it. But then when people say, okay, well, now what do we do? And, Matt, I think to your point earlier, the internet is not this problem. The internet is the internet. And then there's the date at which this starts to evolve. And so if you spend time and read the Design It For Us platform, you say, oh, wait, there are things we can do. There are actions we can take. A lot of what's coming up, and will come up tomorrow in the testimony again, is this discussion about cigarette smoking. And I've spent, as a student of this space, a lot of time reading about the changes in cigarette smoking. And the important thing is there was no single thing. No, cigarette smoking wasn't outlawed. Social media is not going to be outlawed. There's going to be structural changes. And Brian, I want to go back to the Nick Clegg question. Do you remember the interview that I'm talking about? Does it not make you?
No, very, very well. I mean, look, but he's a paid flag to go out and defend the company, right? And I think it's easy to. I think it's actually easy to defend Facebook and Instagram because so many people are addicted. I am. So why? I totally see where Nick Clegg's coming from. I think he's doing his job. Is that way too cynical? I'm sorry. Is that way too dark?
No, it's just, I think so I've been known to have said in public that I didn't think any of the individual platform leaders were inherently evil, and that, to Matt's point, there were misaligned economic incentives, and that everyone who's buying ads, everyone's participating, everyone who's a shareholder in these platforms, collectively, we all have to make change. But as I rewatched that interview, knowing what I know now about the email that he got from his trusted employee and that Cheryl got from, I feel a little differently this morning. I feel like no, actually, and here's the bad analogy I give. If I owned a local restaurant and it was delicious and people loved coming to it, but one out of every 1,000 meals I served was poisonous, could I come up with some answer in my head and say, well, 999 people had a delicious meal? It's a rounding error. Of course not. I would either fix the poisonous meal or I would shut the restaurant down. There would be no version of Steve Rosenbaum that would say to you, well, one death. So when Zuckerberg hears the stories that Matthew's family tell, all of the families tell, and I've only heard a handful of them, and I assume they're all equally terrible. How can you go to bed at night and look at your children and be okay with that? And, just this morning, YouTube is now talking about limiting the number of times people are exposed to videos about self-harm. Oh, well, that solves it. Limiting the number of times because one is okay? I just don't understand. All right, let's do this. We have great people on the call, and I want to make sure they get a chance to jump in. Mark, you've had a couple of interesting questions in the chat. Do you want to add your voice?
You talking to me?
I am.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I wasn't checking how many marks there were on the call. This is great. And I must say that all the team is fantastic. But Matthew, your opening positioning of it, I think, was very was revelatory to me, especially your experience with asbestos. I'm old enough, obviously, to have sort of lived through that. In fact, had some friends who are on both sides of that. Some of them you may have litigated against, and I'm sorry that some of them were on the wrong side. But this idea of economics is, I think, what one of my chat questions was about. You suggested, and I agree, the wallet is almost always the motivator for some of these entities. And I wondered kind of where was the status in these cases or in the entire process of actually assigning economic value so that Zuck would say, I'm going to lose X or Y unless I settle or unless I alter my behavior. Are the numbers, in your opinion, are the economic assignments high enough, or are we getting to that point where you believe it will get their attention?
Well, we just had, I mean, they have been operating under Section 230 immunity. I mean, what is incredible is when you look through Frances Haugen's documents, all of which are now available through Harvard, there's a lot of soul searching, but there's no discussion of this is really going to cost us money. And the reason is that Section 230, in their mind, takes that economic agency off the table. Now, in direct answer to your question, I mean, well, the idea of product liability is to internalize the cost. Currently, an economist would say you have an externality, that the costs of these dangerous products are borne by parents who bury their kids, healthcare providers, clergy, law enforcement, counselors. And so in answer to your question, we believe that if these cases are allowed to go forward, the damages will be substantial. I mean, how do you get in front of a jury and explain how it's okay to send a suicide video to a 16-year-old kid with no mental health harm? How do you say it's okay to send a 12-year-old girl who's looking for exercise videos, material that encourages her to hate the way she looks and to starve herself? All of these. So we believe that, if once these cases start going through the jury, the tort system will do what it's supposed to do. I mean, and this is not liberal Democrat woo stuff. This is basically Richard Posner economics, in that by internalizing the cost, you will have an equilibrium. Will you have social media companies 100% safe? No, of course not. Cars aren't 100% safe, but you will have the same kind of economic equilibrium with respect to social media that exists with every other product in America. And so it is our hope that once these, but currently, on kind of in answer to your question, Mark, there's nothing on the other side of the balance sheet for them on the cost.
Well, let me
some bad.
Just a quick follow up. Some examples like the Exxon Valdez, whatever tragedy you want to list over the last several decades. In some cases, the company considered a cost of doing business. God knows Goldman Sachs has paid a lot of fines just to be Goldman Sachs, and doesn't seem to alter the vampire sucking squid label that was laid on it many years ago. But is it your opinion that these companies will end up trying to figure out a number that represents the cost of doing business and will proceed unimpeded like others have done in their misbehavior? Or do you believe there is a way to actually correct their behavior, alter the behavior, and have sustainable change?
I believe the latter, if they are able to be held accountable. If what we are seeing and starting to emerge by trial courts allowing these cases to go forward in the face of Section 230. Yeah, I mean, I think that, if you look at the number of children that are suffering severe mental illness as a result of social media, that's a tremendously, those costs are significant. They're not, many of which are very quantifiable. And that's what's interesting about kind of what the state AGs are doing, is that, I mean, how much money are states spending for hospitalization for eating disorders? So yes, I do think that you will have an economic equilibrium so that it's not, so that the products will be substantially safer than they are today.
Thank you.
Next, I want to call on Kevin, who was talking about marketing. Kevin, jump in there.
Yeah, Mark, you brought something up at the end there. If you can hear me, okay, everyone. Look, first of all, I appreciate the three of you being on this and talking about this issue. But you got to follow the money here, and that's the biggest issue. And I think, Matt, especially when it comes to the social platforms, until you get I would say the Mark Reeds, John Renz, and the holding company CEOs of all the large media buyers in the world in front of Congress to sit down and talk about the dollars that flow to this platform. It's going to be akin to, let's say, what CBS does today, which is essentially an internal review of, is this going to cost us more to just get the fines for whatever it is that we do, or not? And the reality is, based on what we're doing now, whatever the fines are going to be, I unfortunately don't think it's going to have the impact that we want until we get to a point where advertisers stand up. And by the way, the dirty secret is that the chief marketing officers of all these companies know everything that we're talking about and know all the issues. The problem is, it's effective. It works. They know who the consumers are. They can target. They can take on that old Wanamaker approach of, if 50% of my advertising is wasted, I don't know which 50%. Well, guess what? Facebook knows which 50%. They know exactly which 50% is wasted. And they're doing things tactically behind the scenes with data that we've never seen before, that was originally unintended. But the problem is that it props up the whole advertising ecosystem, and it allows marketers to spin up. So until we go down that path of getting to the money, then we're not going to make the headway that we want to make. I don't care what kind of fines you give. I started something called the Media Advisory Board for Sandy Hook Promise. I'm very closely involved with the founders of Sandy Hook Promise. We've put together a board of over 70 people in media, advertising, marketing, entertainment, who are all trying to solve the gun violence problem, which is kind of staggering, especially when you look at what goes on to Instagram of native content that's developed by Remington. These kinds of things are just insane, and are unfettered. So how do we, I think, in terms of the legal work that you're doing, how do we, and listen, I'm guilty. I started digital advertising in the mid 90s, and I was there when Facebook went online. I sat next to a guy who said, I started search. And then I said, hey, I'm Kevin Walsung. He said, hey, I'm Larry Page. And that was the beginning of it. When we look at what this became, it was unintended. But how does that play into what you're doing today? How does getting to the dollars play into what you're doing today?
Well, I think this is why regulation, I think, is is essential but not sufficient part of the problem. Facebook paid a couple $2 billion to the FTC, and it was kind of, as you've said, this was 3 years ago, and it was, as you've said, kind of a cost of doing business. Juries are different. Juries impose two things. One, they are the conscience of the community, and two, they impose a level of uncertainty that regulates social behavior. And we have seen in many cases where the prospect of facing jury verdicts does regulate social behavior as part, or corporate behavior as part of an overall gestalt. And I think you really put your finger on something as well. This is not a one-ring circus. I mean, this is going to have to get solved in the halls of Congress, in the halls of justice, but also in the court of public opinion. And we as citizens are going to need to learn more about the impact of social media. I mean, a year ago, no one knew what an algorithm was. And so, when I'm thinking hopefully, and it's not often, but when I think hopefully, I think back when I was a teenager, when drunk driving was ubiquitous, and a lot of my friends died on the highways. And we had this movement called Mothers Against Drunk Driving that mobilized and did a couple things. They changed the laws. They made drunk driving a real crime, but they also changed the consciousness. They changed the way we thought about things. They made it okay for a kid to ask their parent for a ride home, no questions asked, or a friend to say, are you okay to drive, without impugning his masculinity. I think that as we change our consciousness and how we talk about social media, as parents lead by example by putting down their phones, I think we can kind of, in this 3-ring circus, have a more a hopeful thing, because today drunk driving deaths are a fraction of what they were 40 years ago. So that is my hope.
That's a great point. And as a matter of fact, and this is why I love what Steve is doing. If you go back to 1988, Harvard researchers wrote a note to the writers of Cheers and Law and Order asking them to put designated driver into the scripts to change the narrative of drunk driving and what happened. And it was seeded to a point where designated driver is actually in Webster's dictionary now. I mean, it's something like that. I had a question for Brian, which is more about news and media in general. We talk about Section 230 and what that means. It's like 180 degrees from what the fairness doctrine was. If you speak to most people today, and I would actually ask Emma, have you ever heard of the fairness doctrine? And the fairness doctrine was something that, to me, the day the fairness doctrine died was the day that balanced media, which should apply to social media platforms, also died. And it doesn't, there's no oversight. There is nothing that regulates it for the well-being of content and what exists out there. The amount of disinformation that flows through these pipes is unfettered, and it's really mind-boggling. So do we think that something like the fairness doctrine could come about again?
I do not. I have absolutely no confidence in the government's ability to engage in that way. But I also don't think we live in a media environment that would enable, allow for it. Meaning, back then we lived in an environment of scarcity. Now we live in a media environment of abundance, and it's only going to get more and more abundant. So I just don't see any way. I've thought about it a lot. I don't see how it's possible. What I do think is possible is, for companies, for media companies, for newsrooms, for journalists, for people who view themselves as journalists, to hold each other accountable. And I think a recent example of that was coverage of the Gaza hospital blast and the amount of criticism that was directed at news organizations, including from the inside, their own staffers, that did cause some self-reflection. That's the best thing I think we can hope for in this environment, is kind of not a self-regulation, but kind of checking each other, balancing each other. I think that's even true at Fox. Steve mentioned my book about Fox coming out next week called Network of Lies. This is going to sound hopelessly optimistic, but I believe it's true. Even Fox is not immune to criticism. I think that's true for social media companies. Even Meta is not immune to criticism entirely. Maybe mostly, but not entirely. So I do think that's the only option we have, because I don't see a way to have a top-down regulation on it when it comes to the news business.
So let's talk about laws for a minute. So one of the things that I'm in the middle of, and Emma, I spent some time over the weekend on Design It For Us. And one of the things that's fascinating is there is a collection of young people and parents who want to see changes in the laws. And then there are some significant differences. And the biggest difference, and the one that I can't figure out how to kind of square the circle, is young people say they don't want to have parents be able to control their access to the internet. Most of the state government actions that have happened so far or are being proposed are about giving parents more control to manage. And this, I think, Matt, you play into this conversation because it is a subset of the blame the parents conversation, which is, I know, rather than hold the platforms responsible, we'll give the parents the keys. And one of the things when I heard some of the parents speak at the Archwell event was they all said, we had our kids' passwords, we just didn't know that they had other Instagram accounts. And are there, first of all, Emma, are there laws or proposals that you're supporting, that your organizations are supporting? We should know what those are, because that would be interesting. And then how do we square the circle on the question of parent control versus youth control?
Yeah, I'll jump on this quickly, because I do think that Matthew will provide more substantive answers. But right now, Design It For Us really has very windy, so just a ton of wind. Because of what you had said earlier, that there is no silver bullet, there is no policy that we are in love with right now. But in the policy platform, what we stipulate, the onus should not be placed on tech companies to defer accountability to design their products with young people in mind and in a more humane and sustainable fashion, to this idea that parents have to be these dogs, unbelievable watchdogs of their kids' activity, which is, to be quite frank, unrealistic and impossible. I've talked with a ton of young people. We've had conversations about how, my parents, parents of a lot of coalition members did have all their passwords. They watched them. They looked at all their content. The young people are scrappy. Young people can find ways in, ways out, and can hide information. So one of the major things that we look for in pieces of legislation is how can we productively build out policies that do not just place the onus on the parent to watch over their child, but rather looks at design practices, proactively preventing harm, and incorporating the young person, their well-being into the conversation prior to when the content is circulating. And that's one thing that we also, I think Zaman wrote a really great op-ed, I'll pop in here, about the differences between a lot of state laws that are passing. Some of them are looking at putting, age restrictions on, social media companies, making it so that, parents have to give parental consent. And then looking at that in contrast to like an age appropriate design code, you can really clearly see the differences legally and legislatively are being approached and how kids are being protected online. And we fundamentally do believe in the more proactive approach rather than just placing the onus on the parent. So I'll pass it off to Matthew because I know that you probably have a great material.
Well, yeah,
to add.
and I would agree there is no magic bullet. Okay. I mean, teenagers have been evading parental authority for as long as they've been teenagers. A teenager that voluntarily gives their parent their username and password just flunked Teenager 101. And I think what is particularly pernicious, though, is that these products are really designed to kind of put gasoline on the natural tension between teenagers and their parents and make it possible for teenagers to have this world where their parents have no ability to control or know what's going on. When I was a kid, if the teenager acted up, the parents would ground them. And believe me, having gone through it myself, it's no fun having a surly teenager in your house who's grounded. But at least parents knew that in the four walls of their homes, their kids were safe. And I think what the difference here is that parents are not able to ensure their kids' safety. And look, we know that just from a matter of basic neurology. Kids do not have the development, the executive function in their prefrontal cortex to make good decisions. Teenagers make bad decisions. We all did. But the way the products are currently configured, they put it on warp speed, and they make the bad decisions irreparable, and they make the kind of normal yin and yang between teenagers and kids much more one-sided.
Steve, you're muted.
We have 10 minutes remaining, and I want to end with actions. We're all here. We're all paying attention. We have lots of other things we could have been doing, and we chose to be here. What are the things individually? What are each of you doing, and then collectively, what are digest? One of the things I think that happens is people get frustrated, and they get the sense that the problem is so big, there's nothing they can do, and they'll leave it to you guys to sort it out. What are things we can do?
Well, I think that one of the main things that we can do is encourage our senators to put the Kids Online Safety Act on the floor of the Senate. This is a bill that was sponsored by Marsha Blackburn and Dick Blumenthal, not exactly your ideological bosom buddies. And one of the gratifying things is that there is a real bipartisan consensus that something needs to be done. Is it a perfect bill? Of course not. But some of the provisions of that bill will address some of the things that make social media most pernicious, while still carving out safety measures for our LGBT kids and for others to ensure that there's a safe space for LGBT kids to explore and experience their lives together. That would be a huge step forward. The other thing would be to continue to hold these companies legally accountable in courts of law. And the third thing is just to do the kind of work that you're doing, Steve, and my gosh, Emma, the work that your organization is doing is getting the word out, because ultimately, we can make the social media platform safer, but until we change our consciousness of how we think about social media, how we use social media, we're really only shifting the deck chairs on the Titanic.
We have a question from Catherine. Yeah. We have a question from Catherine Fry, so I'll let her jump in there. Catherine, go ahead.
Sure. Sorry about that. I didn't know that I had a question so much as I was making a comment. Here, I'll turn my camera on. So I'm a media literacy educator. I teach at Brooklyn College, but I also started a media literacy community movement in New York City back in 2007, and it lasted until 2019. And basically, we practiced critical media literacy education. We went into schools, we went into community centers, we went into churches, we went after school programs, you name it. And we were trying to teach not just young people, but teachers and other public leaders exactly how the internet works. And to the point of many of you who've been, speaking today, this is a really complicated project, and it's not about the content. This trial is absolutely right. It's about the medium itself. It's about the digital environment and understanding it. So I just wanted to put my 2 cents in there. The critical media literacy movement is working on this, and I really applaud Emma and the work that youth are engaged in around this. It's exactly what needs to happen.
All right. Thank you. Brian, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was, I agree with Catherine that most people do not even know the basics about media and tech literacy. And we should be honest, as we who are on this Zoom who do have that knowledge, we should be honest and realistic at how little many folks know. And it's not necessarily their fault. All of this is still so new. I was saying, what a difference 10 years makes, right? It's all still so new to many families. And so I just wanted to chime in on the parents' conversation and say one of the bottom-up efforts that I think has to happen at the same time that groups like Emma's are working is groups like Wait Until 8, encouraging parents not to give phones to kids so early. There's a headline I saw in Charlottesville the other day: parents enraged after Charlottesville schools ban cell phones. And I'm thinking, I'm sure some parents were ticked off. We've got to flip that script around so the parents are the ones urging for those sorts of rules and restrictions. Look, I was the kid who was making up fake AOL dial-up accounts to hide from my parents. I know there's always going to be those efforts and those loopholes and those tricks, but schools and society at large can have can send the right signals, can create this generation's version of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And I think Emma and her peers are showing the way forward. We have to have parents' energy on that front as well.
Yeah.
Matthew, I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to, because I have you on the call, I want to ask, when the original complaint came out from the 44 attorneys general, 2 things. I just immediately thought of what it takes to get 4 people on a Google Doc to agree on anything, periods, commas, and lawyers, with all due respect to your peers, are the most argumentative about periods and commas. And how did that lawsuit, the one that began this Zoom call today, how did that get drafted? How did 43, and the number keeps moving around, is it 33 or 43? I know it's a couple different cases, but how do you get that many lawyers to agree on a document? And why were there redactions in it?
There were redactions because some of the documents were produced pursuant to a subpoena and were arguably or potentially proprietary, and so they chose to redact them out of an abundance of caution, I would say. And I think it's just testimony to the ubiquity of this problem that got 43 attorneys general, 42 of all political stripes together. But also this was a long investigation, and we were in close touch with the AGs really over a 2-year period, as were others. And so it was a process of compromise, but also kind of symptomatic of both the ubiquity of the problem and the urgency of a solution.
And by the way, it should be said out loud to Kevin's point about marketing. So the suit was filed on Tuesday. Wednesday morning, Meta announced its profits, which were enormous. And you could feel the media coverage struggle with that. Like, bad news story, good. Where do you think those profits come from? So Kevin, jump in.
Well, I was going to say, they listen. It all comes from advertisers. So I've always said this, like, if there's only 2 ways to monetize content. Either you're willing to pay for it, or somebody else is, and that somebody else is an advertiser. And in that instance, if it's free, The product is you. And I said that earlier in terms of the data and where we are. You know, the other thing I do want to bring up, because Matt, I don't know where this is going, but you know, there's a whole other generation, which is more of the senior citizen, 65 plus, which is actually going through a really bad situation with social media. You know, I've written something called "How Facebook Stole My Mother," and it's a real problem because they fundamentally don't understand how the technology works and what it actually does to you. And so my last question actually is to Emma, because you're living in it right now, and WashU is an unbelievable school. You know, I think about technology and where we are in the last 2 years, especially with generative AI and what's happened, image recognition, language recognition. You know, are there technologies that's to me, that's the only way that we're going to solve this problem. We're only going to beat technology with technology. So what is the technology? Who are the people out there with a moral compass who are developing technologies that are going to go in there and say, hey, that image, this shouldn't be there. Take it down. I'm sure that Facebook and the others already have it, but they're certainly not going to turn it on because it just reduces traffic and takes down pages that are controversial. And anyway, so.
Let me answer that. You know, we all, other than Emma, everyone else on this call remembers platforms that were big in their day and are now gone. So I don't know if the question as much is solving the problem of the current platforms, or as it is giving young people the power and autonomy and resources to build social media environments that meet their needs. I mean, you know, and that's why I think, you know, having people from inside Facebook come out and reveal more information and more research, and the fact that the company knew, gives, I think, all of us collectively the opportunity to say, you know, I remember when Facebook was awesome. I remember when seeing pictures of my friends and vacations and family stuff was great. And I want that back. I want to have social media where I'm not the product, but I'm the customer. So with that, we are out of time. You guys have been amazing. Thank you all. On behalf of everyone at the Center for Sustainable Media, we're glad that you were able to do this, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.